Ladies and gentlemen, how we all doing tonight? Jack here, welcome back to the channel. It's been a good couple weeks since I last uploaded anything, and we'll be getting to that in just a little bit. And this is gonna be something a little bit different. This is gonna be more of like a podcast style video, and I'll be getting to that in just a little bit. But yeah, I got quite a lot of things that have happened in the racing community in the past couple weeks that I do want to talk about and get off my mind. And we'll be doing that in this video here and talking about, I guess you could say, just what I kind of want to do going into the future with content creation, especially on this channel going into 2025. Because the main thing, and I'm just going to start off with this. So over the past couple months, it's been very hectic in the background. I want to make sure it's not like, work related here, but that kind of goes into what I'm talking about. Past couple weeks have been pretty hectic. I'm gonna move my head down there, a little bit better headroom there, a little bit picture wise, better framing. Past couple months have been pretty hectic. I started a new career. If you do not know, I am now a licensed real estate agent. I'm a licensed realtor here in the state of Pennsylvania, and being a realtor is a full-time job. This is a full-time job that I have, and content creation was never really a full-time job for me. It was always something part-time that I did like in the background. But now that I have like a full-time job, like I'm a realtor and everything, and I have and a realtor is not like a 9-to-5. Being a real estate agent is not necessarily a 9-to-5. You don't go to the office from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You go home, There's a lot of times where like you may have a showing at like 2 o'clock, and then at 6 o'clock later you have to be in the office doing something, writing something. Or you have a showing at 9 a.m. and then you have something at 2 p.m. and then something at like 6 p.m. There's a lot of downtime in between. And there's always like pockets of time where you're not doing anything, but then there's pockets where you're doing like everything. And that could be on a Sunday, on a Tuesday, on a Thursday. It could be whenever. You don't have a stable, I guess you could say, time frame of when you're working and when you're not. But that's also, part of the reason why I became a realtor. I can't stand a 9-to-5 job. I know for a fact I would not enjoy a 9-to-5. I like being my own boss, and I like coming from, my other job, which is that of a photographer, videographer, working with clients and everything. I kind of am already in that freelance lifestyle. So doing realty, like I really did a lot of real estate photography, and that's kind of what led me to just doing real estate like full on. So long story short, I'm a real estate agent now, and I don't have as much time as I wish I did. I don't even have the time that I had like 2 months ago. I literally just started like a month ago. I got licensed, I think, the 10th of January officially. I passed my exam the 7th. So it's been a wild ride. And starting out a new career, you're gonna be doing a lot of time, spending a lot of time doing things, learning, that type of stuff. And that's just really what's been going on, and why uploads and streams have really slowed down. I streamed the other day, but it was just on Twitch. I was still like sick. That too. I got sick fucking 3 times this winter. I've been sick 3 fucking times this winter already. Like I've had the flu, I've had a cold, and I had something. I don't even know what it was back in December, but like, I don't know, man. I've been sick 3 times. I hope that's the last of it for this winter. I fucking hate winter, dude. Like, it's snow. No, we're having like a thunderstorm right now, but it's like February and there's snow everywhere. It's just awful. Just awful. But yeah, that's kind of where I've been, and that's kind of made me think, starting a new job and a new career, that's really made me think, okay, I need to kind of rethink the way I produce content. If I want to actually produce content consistently on this channel, I really need to rethink the way that I do it. So that's and at the same time, I've been watching a lot of, I guess you could say, like talk shows. Like I've been watching a lot of sports stuff, especially since my Eagles. Shout out the Philadelphia Eagles, Super Bowl champs. Let's fucking go. Fuck Kansas City. Let's go. I'm getting a little ahead of myself there. But I've been watching a lot of like sports programs, that type of stuff. And a lot of these like videos and like content that people are making are in podcast format. And I've done a podcast for 10 years, I have a history of podcasting behind me. So that really is like another thing, is like where I'm looking at, and I'm like, okay, I kind of need to really rethink how I'm creating like content. And there's a lot of things that I like talking about when it comes to racing games. And I noticed just a lot of the content that I've made in the past is just like commentary stuff. I'm trying to reach for my iced tea. I couldn't find it. But a lot of the stuff that I made in the past is just commentary videos. And I feel like that would work better in like a podcast style format. Also, a podcast style format allows me to be a little more personally, just a little more myself. It gives me a little more freedom to kind of talk about other things other than just like racing games or stuff like that. I'm able to kind of bounce back and forth between things. I really need a drink here real quick. Chat, Turkey Hill iced tea. We on that diet shit now. No more sugar. No more sugar. We're on that diet shit right now. But yeah. So I don't really have, I also really don't have a name, unlike like DRIVECAST, you know, where that's what it was. It was just DRIVECAST, you know, we had like the name from like day one. I don't really have like a name of what I'm going to call this. Obviously this isn't like no one else is like here right now. I'm obviously the only person talking right now, but I would love to have guests on and just talk about cool things, like cool people. It does not even really just content creators, just like cool people that I know within the community, within the car community, racing community, or just like cool people in general. I would love to have on and just sit down, talk about stuff, talk about topics, like that type of stuff. I would just love to have cool people on to talk about things. And, you know, I don't really have a name for this. I kind of was like brainstorming some names, like the Clutch Kick podcast, but I don't really do a lot of drift content, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I also came up with like something called like MotorYap or something. I don't really know what I'm going to call this. I have like a logo here that I made. It's literally just text. Graphic design is not my passion. Graphic design is not really my passion. So if someone wants to go out and make something, or you have like a better name for like what I'm going to call this, please do. Please tell me, because I have no fucking, like MotorYap. Is that like a good name or not? I don't really know. I feel like it's a good name. It may be a dog shit name. I don't know. I'm not really confident in my name right there for this, whatever this podcast is. And I guess the way I'm going to structure like this podcast, and I don't really have like a set schedule or anything. Again, like I said, my career is it could be very busy. It could be very light. It's back and forth. Really just kind of recording when I have time. To just, and this isn't going to be like to the whole production scale of DRIVECAST, especially the more recent episodes of DRIVECAST where we've like sat down and edited those podcasts. Also, this isn't like, so like I feel like this could be a little more consistent, and this can be like a little more often. That's the same thing as consistent, but you know what I mean. It's even when I do have like people on. And speaking of DRIVECAST, I do want to talk about DRIVECAST for a bit and just all the boys. So we love DRIVECAST. I love DRIVECAST. DRIVECAST, though, it's been 10 years since we started DRIVECAST, and DRIVECAST has always kind of been a very inconsistent podcast. You know, there's been hiatuses, there's been periods where we're going ham for like years at a time. The unfortunate truth is that we all have our careers. Like all the boys have our careers right now. We have our like lives, and we all span like 3 different time zones, and getting a bunch of guys together across 3 separate time zones while we're all working full-time jobs is a lot harder than you think. I said that like an asshole. It's like, it's a lot harder than you guys fucking think, huh? No, it's pretty hard. It's not as easy as we wish it was. It's not like back in the day when we were all in high school and we had like as much free time as like we did. That's just the unfortunate bit, but we're all still fantastic friends behind the scenes. We all met up in England, like back in June and like late May, early June. We all met a lot of us met for the first time. It was my first time meeting Jay. It was my first time meeting my boy Charlie, my boy Rain, my boy Stelio. You know, he came all the way from New Zealand over to England. Then me and Richard flew out together. So it was me, Richard, Cam, Jay, our boy Charlie, and our boy Rain, all there in England, and of course our boy Stelio as well. Just hanging out in England. Cam did like a DJ set. You know, it was so fucking cool being in England for the first time. Literally, I'm like one of the. I'm an American who's been to Birmingham, England. You know, I hear all the things about like Birmingham. It's a fucking shithole. It reminded me of Philly. Birmingham reminded me of Philly. Take that for what you will. I love Philly though. So, but it was the same type of vibe. But yeah, no, we're all great friends behind the scenes. We still talk all the time. It's just that unfortunately we don't have the time to sit down and record podcasts as much as we wish we did, you know? And that's kind of had like a little bit of a void in my soul, because I love doing podcasts. I love like sitting down and just talking. And I know a lot of yous like grew up on DRIVECAST, which is like fucking wild, like to think. But I know a lot of yous enjoy the podcast and DRIVECAST, and this isn't like a replacement of DRIVECAST or anything. DRIVECAST will return at some point, sometime, whether that may be a year or two down the road or like 6 months, who knows. It will return at some point, you know. It's just a matter of us getting together and recording, like sitting down and recording for like an hour or two. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, I'd love to have guests on. Like I said before, I'd love to like actually have people, just cool people to come in, talk about stuff and just like hang out really and discuss like topics or just like some like fun stories that they have. That's kind of another like thing that I want to do. You know, I want to be a little more creative with my content. Because we all know right now, Need for Speed's not in a fantastic state in terms of knowing when the next game's coming out, because it's probably going to be a couple years. Even though Criterion left the Kaizen team left Unbound on a super high note, who knows when the next game's going to come out? It may be a couple years, and I don't want to sit down and just like milk Need for Speed or the Crew or like racing content till a new game comes out. I want to actually like produce something original, you know, something you can only find on my channel. And I feel like doing a podcast and then like having like cool people on and just talking about like cool topics, I feel like that's like a good way of like, you know, branching out and kind of making your own type of like brand, I guess you could say. And that's just my 2 cents. And I'm also just kind of rambling. But speaking about topics, I do want to talk about some topics. This is obviously like the main like gist of like the podcast, talking about like current racing game topics and just like other things. And I want to talk about first off, Forza Horizon 5 coming to PS5. That's fucking crazy. Who would have thought in like 5-10 years ago that Forza Horizon 5 or just Forza Horizon in general be on PlayStation? That's nuts. That's nuckin' futz, I guess you could say. So yeah, I think sometime in early March, I don't have the specific date, but Forza Horizon 5 and all the DLC that's been released up to that point is going to be coming over to PlayStation 5. And I think this really just kind of shows where Xbox is going. I think the real telltale sign will be with the next Forza Horizon game, if that comes to PS5 on launch. I doubt it will, because I still think they want an exclusive for Xbox for a little bit, like a timed exclusive at least. But I think Xbox kind of sees the writing on the wall, because they're not doing too hot compared to PlayStation. And I'm saying this as an Xbox owner. I have a Series S right next to me, and it's an okay console. It's a good companion console. It's a good console to load up Forza on, or like some racing games and play Forza, or like just play racing games. That's really what I have it for. It's not like for me personally, it's not like a main console. Like, I still feel like the PlayStation 5, even though this console generation has been absolute dog shit, I still think the PlayStation 5 is beating out Xbox pretty handily, and I think it shows, because Xbox is more willing to throw their games on competitors' consoles than PlayStation is, even though PlayStation has been putting a lot of their stuff on PC. And PlayStation's put a couple games. I think like The Show, like MLB The Show, but I think that was more the MLB saying, hey, we want our game on Xbox, as opposed to PlayStation putting it on Xbox. But you get my drift. I'm still waiting for Gran Turismo 7 to come to PC. I am not buying a PlayStation 5. Like, I don't want to shell out the money just to play Gran Turismo. I still have my PS4 just because of Gran Turismo 7. Like, that's the only reason I have it. That and Drive Club. So if Gran Turismo 7 can come to PC, that'd be great. I could use VR on it. And please, PlayStation, if you're listening, please, Gran Turismo 7 on PC. But going back on topic, Forza Horizon 5 on PS5. I think this really kind of shows that Xbox and Microsoft are kind of leaving consoles behind, and they're going to be going the way of Sega and just kind of producing games for other platforms. But what other platforms are there? It's just the Nintendo Switch 2, which is coming out, and PlayStation and PC. I still personally, I still feel like they will produce an Xbox console for next generation, but it might just be like something like a Series S where it's a Game Pass like machine. I still think as long as they have Game Pass, I still think they'll put out a console, because like the Series S probably still made them money, at least, you know, maybe not the Series X, but the Series S definitely did, because it's a good casual console. Just have it there, load up Game Pass, you can stream movies on it. It's a good casual box. I know a lot of people who aren't really gamers who have like a Series S. Just, you know, it plays Fortnite, it plays Forza, that's all, and it plays movies. That's basically it. And that's all people want it for. And you can stream like Netflix and everything on it. And I still think they'll put out a console, but I don't think they'll be focusing as much on their consoles as PlayStation or Nintendo will be. I still think if like someone, if they're going after like hardcore gamers, they're gonna put stuff on PlayStation or PC. And I still think a lot of people who are like actual hardcore, like strictly like I love gaming, I'm a big gamer. I think a lot of them are on PC nowadays or on like PlayStation, but I don't know. That's just me. And also, this really has to ask some questions. This really kind of brings up to my next point, the Crew Motorfest. Because here's the thing, the Crew Motorfest's whole MO, their whole shtick with the Crew Motorfest was that it was basically Forza Horizon, but on PlayStation. They literally took the identity of the Crew as a franchise and just made it into a Forza Horizon clone to try and be Forza Horizon on PlayStation. But now they're not Forza Horizon on PlayStation, because Forza Horizon's literally on PlayStation now. So like, what are they? How are we gonna see? What's Ivory Tower's game plan here? You know, they have done some like small things to try and differentiate themselves. I know they added like a police chase mode, which again, ever since they shut down the Crew 1, I've refused to touch that game with a 6-foot pole, and I am my boycott, my personal boycott of the Crew as a franchise is continuing until I'm able to play the Crew 1 unbounded, unrestricted on my own, and it looks like that will happen soon with the Crew Unlimited. Shout out everyone working on the Crew Unlimited. We have some smart ass fucking people in this community, and it looks like the Crew Unlimited is doing fantastic work. Their last beta was a huge success, so I'm seriously hoping I'll be able to play the Crew Unlimited very, very soon. Shout out to all the boys working on the Crew Unlimited. But going back to that, until I can play the Crew 1 again, I am not touching another Crew game. I'm not touching Motorfest, not touching the Crew 2. I'm not touching any Ubisoft game. I'm not buying any Ubisoft game. I say I'm not touching a Ubisoft game. I'm literally doing a Watch Dogs 1 playthrough. But I'm not giving Ubisoft any more of my goddamn fucking money until I can play the Crew 1. But going back on topic, before we go back on topic, I need another drink. But going back on topic, the Crew Motorfest. I know they added like a police chase mode where it's like but it's not like the police. It's like I don't get why Ubisoft doesn't like having cops in their games. I know the last Watch Dogs didn't really have cops in it either. It was like a PMC, but in this game, it's like we're the enforcers. We are gonna enforce these street racers, like, and then these street racers like we're the wolves or whatever. It's cringy and stupid, but like they added a cop chase mode, and I know that's something I've been chirping on ever since they removed cops from the Crew 2. I've been chirping about that for like 5 years. I mean, I stopped giving a shit a couple years ago, but like I remember back in the day, like 5 years ago, I probably uploaded 3-4 videos a week crying about why the Crew didn't have cops. But I think the bigger reason, I didn't really think about this back in the day, was how the Crew 1 went from like having a unique identity, like a dark unique identity, to being a festival racer. And I think that's really what I kind of missed, the whole like, you know, vibe. And I just focused on like one specific thing. That was a symptom, but not like the cause. But anyway, going off topic here. The Crew Motorfest, aside from like some things that they've added, and they also found out how to add on to the map without adding in like a load screen, which is something Forza still hasn't been able to do. But the game doesn't have that much else to offer that Forza doesn't, you know? They've got like grand races, sure, they got some planes and boats, but like who cares? No one gives a shit. No one gives a fuck about that, you know? When it comes to like racing games, what does the Crew Motorfest have to offer over Forza Horizon? Not a whole lot. So their whole okay, bikes. I'm forgetting about bikes. Okay, you fair point. If you're playing the Crew Motorfest for bikes, fair point. That's whatever. But like aside from like some small things and then like bikes, I don't see like I don't really see it. Forza Horizon, I really hope, and here's the thing, competition at the end of the day is a good thing. It's a great thing. I seriously hope this makes Ubisoft rethink the Crew as a franchise going forward, because they can't just be, they can kind of get away with it now since Forza Horizon 5, they've already made tons of money with Motorfest, right? And Forza Horizon 5 is coming to PlayStation pretty late, right? But this won't work next time. They need to go back to the drawing board for whatever comes next for the Crew franchise and do something different. They can't just be Forza Horizon but on PlayStation, because Forza Horizon's on PlayStation now. It may be a little late to the party, but the next iteration of the game is probably not, and it's probably going to eat your lunch if you don't innovate. I feel like the Crew should go back to what they stood for with the Crew 1. That's being what I like to call like a freedom racer. We don't really we got festival racers, illegal street racers. I think the Crew is a freedom racer, God bless America. The game held a lot of hats, and sometimes it didn't wear the hats correctly, but at the end of the day, I appreciate that it tried and had a very unique identity. From racing street cars on the streets of Detroit to rally racing around the mountains of like New England, and then heading into the south through the bayou, racing like hypercars through the streets of Miami, racing full-on circuit spec cars along the fucking Monterey coast in California. And there's a whole fucking section literally dedicated to being Smuggler's Run. There's literally I didn't appreciate this as a kid, but there's a whole ass section where you're literally just doing Smuggler's Run across like the desert. Like, that's insane to me. And then they added like the monster trucks, the drifting, the drag, and we're talking like proper like drag spec cars with like parachutes and shit, which for Crew games afterwards don't have for some reason. I don't know. And then the summit was a lot of fun. We spent countless hours just playing the PvP in the summit. We had a lot of fun on the Crew, and I'm hoping we can return to those glory days. And I really think that the Crew as a franchise went downhill immediately after the Crew 1. With the Crew 2, because it just lost that vibe. It lost that edge, and nowadays it's literally trying to be Forza. I feel like if they keep trying to be Forza, it's eventually their luck's going to run out. And especially if Forza Horizon 5 stays, or Forza Horizon 6 comes out on PS5 like on launch, they got to do something to innovate. And I feel like if they go back to kind of what the Crew 1 was, I think they can really kind of stay unique and build a unique identity. But at the same time, this is all contingent on if Ubisoft survives, because I know Ubisoft right now is not doing too hot, which I love to see. I may be preying on their downfall in the background. I'm not lying. I'm not lying. Especially since they shut down the Crew 1, I may be preying on Ubisoft's downfall. I just may be preying on their downfall. But I know Ubisoft right now is not doing too hot. I know their pre-orders for the new Assassin's Creed. And I know there's some like fucking stupid I know there's some controversy. There's some like, culture war crumb bum bullshit in the background. I don't give a shit about that culture war stuff. I just know that like Assassin's Creed is like their flagship series. And with pre-orders being down, there being a lot, and they have to keep suspiciously delaying the game, that's not really good for Ubisoft, especially if their flagship game underperforms. I think if this Assassin's Creed Shadows underperforms, it may be game over for Ubisoft. And that really, and I know everyone's talking about this because I know they wasted a fuck ton of money on Skull and Bones, the world's first quadruple A game, which sold not well at all. I know X Defiant shutting down. I know there's just a lot of, and they spend their time making like NFT games in 2025, which, what the fuck? And that leads me to like the Crew, because no one in the mainstream like gaming space talks about the Crew. It's always kind of like sat in like the back quiet, And I know the game has like a pretty healthy fan base, but what does that mean for Ivory Tower? What does that mean for the Crew as a franchise? If Ubisoft like collapses, I wonder how that spells for Ivory Tower. I think their best bet is being bought out by a different publisher. and then we'll see what happens from there. But who knows what happens? Because I don't think I've heard of any layoffs or anything hitting Ivory Tower. But who knows if that happens? Who knows like what's going to happen? Because that's crazy. If Ubisoft were to collapse, I genuinely don't know like what would happen with the Crew as a franchise. Does it just like cease to exist, or they just stop putting out updates, or like what happens? Because like I will say this, out of a lot of the companies under Ubisoft's belt, like all the developers, Ivory Tower seems pretty healthy. So I don't know how much Ubisoft's internal like finances affect Ivory Tower. They have to affect them at some point. But like, I wonder just how much Ivory Tower, I mean, they depend a lot on Ubisoft, but if Ubisoft were to collapse, and a lot of people are saying that could happen this year, I wonder how that spells for the Crew franchise. And on one hand, I am kind of preying on Ubisoft's downfall because they've been fucking us over for a while now. But at the same time, you know, I'm not a big fan of like hundreds of people losing their jobs and, you know, a series that, even though I have a lot of fucking gripes with the Crew as a franchise, you know, seeing that game just completely disappear or like shut down or like go offline, that's not something I'd want to see happen. Because even though I may fucking not like the Crew 2 or the Crew Motorfest, there's a lot of people who do, unfortunately. So, and I really wouldn't want to see them, you know, I wouldn't want to see a bunch of people, as much as cathartic as, you know, it would be to see those games shut down and everyone be upset, because that's literally what we went through with the Crew 1. I don't want to see that happen. I'm not that guy. I don't want to see the same people. I don't want to see people go through the same thing that we did with the Crew 1. But that is a very big possibility if Ubisoft were to collapse. So I'm conflicted. On one hand, Ubisoft, you know, collapsing would not be the saddest thing. I wouldn't be like shedding tears or anything. But like at the same time, you know, that does fuck over a lot of people's livelihoods, and it also affects like the racing community like as a whole. But I do think it serves as a lesson that racing games and like live service, or just in general, that live service games are killing this industry. And I think games are just getting way too big. And this is actually going to shift. We're going to shift gears. Clutch in, shift gears. To our next topic, because I do think games are getting way too big, and I think that Tokyo Xtreme Racer serves as a big example as to why games do not need to be as big as they are to be successful. Now, people have been saying it for a while, that we want smaller games that cost less to develop. It seems like every game that's being developed now is like a huge gamble. It's like all these game developers are at Vegas, like gambling their fucking entire like life savings on like one game, on like one spin. If these games fail or like sell less than expected, then that's the entire studio shut. I mean, I feel like that's what happened with Ghost. Even though Need for Speed Heat sold well, like more people play Heat than Unbound, at least on Steam. And that game hasn't had updates in half a decade. But I feel old saying that. But at the same time, EA shut down Ghost over that. And I feel like the same thing could be happening if games keep getting as big as they are and not selling. I feel like with Genki, with Genki, and I know this from talking with the developers, they set out to create a solid base to bring the return of Tokyo Xtreme Racer. They had a very simple formula with previous Tokyo Xtreme Racer games. Some games expanded on some things like adding in mountains and adding in separate cities, but they wanted to really sit down and they said, okay, what are the absolute fundamentals that make a good Tokyo Xtreme Racer game? What do people love about our games? And they just built a game around that. They had a very narrow scope. They had a very narrow approach to making this game, and they knocked it out of the fucking ballpark. That game, Tokyo Xtreme Racer, as of the time I'm recording this, has overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam, and it fucking deserves it. Like, there's like 3,000 people playing the game right now. I feel like there's more people playing this game than like most racing games on Steam. Like the AAA games. This game is eating AAA games for lunch. And the game's sold at like what, $30 right now. I know it's going to go up when the full game releases in a couple of months, but $30 for a solid 10-hour game, that's about what it took me to like complete all of the both arcs, both acts. There's 3 acts total, 2 of which are available now. The final act will be available when the full game comes out. And that's the thing. This game's in early access, but it does not feel for a second like an early access game. I never felt like I was playing an early access game. I felt like I was playing a proper, fully released game. And that's the thing. This game in early access feels more complete than most AAA racing games now. It feels more complete than Unbound was. It feels more complete than Forza will ever be. It feels more complete than the Crew is. You know, how is this AA game that has a very limited scope, probably a limited budget, eating all of these AAA games' lunch? You know? And I think it really shows that games do not need to be as nearly as big as they're getting. I feel like there is a lot of scope creep, especially with Need for Speed. Just seeing Need for Speed over the years, you know, Need for Speed 2015, when you think about it, was a pretty limited scope game. You know, they set out to build a return of the Need for Speed Underground era of games. You know, that's really what they wanted to make. And they built a map that's pretty limited. You know, it's kind of a closed track, like, map when you think about it. You have like certain areas that are cut off from each other, separated by like tunnels and bridges. You have some like, you know, different like mountain passes and everything. But other than that, it doesn't really go out of its way to bring anything super unique in terms of like map design. Hell, you can't even go downtown. The downtown is just like a set piece. And it focused on having like a refined list of cars, customization options. You know, it was a pretty limited scope game when you think about it. The game didn't go out of its way to try a bunch of different things, but then we got Need for Speed Payback, and all of a sudden there's off-road races, there's like bait crates, there's like a huge story about like heisting and everything. And then with Heat, they had to add off-roading again. They had to add all these different like things, and it felt like they were kind of spending too much time on things that didn't matter. That's really what it felt like. And it felt like they kind of lost track of what we originally wanted as like a game for a Need for Speed game. And that's scope creep. And I think Forza Horizon 5 kind of suffers from the same thing, even though I know Playground Games, they have the manpower to be able to produce a solid game every time they release one. But there's so many things that they add in every Forza game that just gets added onto the next game, and it basically makes the games super huge to the point where other games feel like they need to, in order to stay in line with like the big dogs like Forza, they need to add all this unnecessary bullshit. Like with Need for Speed, I know for a fact that the reason why the maps are all super open following Payback and there's off-road racing is because of the Crew. They wanted to try and stay in line with the Crew and Forza while losing the original vision of why people play Need for Speed. People don't really play Need for Speed to go off-roading. People don't play Need for Speed to do like bait crates and to gamble. Like, no one does that. People play Need for Speed because it's an illegal street racing game. And even though I know the Unbound map suffers from a lot of the same pitfalls that Heat and Payback suffer from, it's to a much lesser extent. And I feel like with Criterion, when they built Need for Speed Unbound, and there was some blowback to this, especially when the game first came out, with Need for Speed Unbound, is they went back and kind of refined what people really what people liked about Need for Speed games. And that's the street racing. They focused on the illegal street racing. They focused on the city, you know. And I know the map is like super huge and expansive and there's a lot of empty areas. That's that old kind of game design that like I'm talking about. I'm saying old game design. That's like the same, like they're still building a map with the idea of rivaling Forza or like the Crew when they don't need to do that. They don't need to do that. I'd much rather have a smaller map where the entire map feels complete and it feels useful and it feels like it's unique in each part of the map, as opposed to having like a part of the map that's like really cool and then the rest of the map being boring. Like, there's too much farmland in Need for Speed Unbound to make it interesting. Farmland's not that interesting, I will say. Shout out Turkey Hill Iced Tea, keeping me hydrated. But talking and rambling like this really makes my mouth dry. And I feel like with Need for Speed, if they really sat down and made, like, the next map does not need to be huge. If the map was half the size of Unbound's in the next game, I would not be upset. As long as that map is unique and every part of the map is like a driver's paradise and a place where, like, I'd actually want to drive, I think it'd be a stellar map. And I think Tokyo Xtreme Racer really kind of shows that a game does not need to be the size or the scope of its rivals to kick fucking ass. You know, people are talking about Tokyo Xtreme Racer as if it is, like, on the same level as Forza and, like, Need for Speed. And it is. Like, the game is fun as fuck. So it's definitely on the levels in terms of enjoyment, but nowhere near the same levels on a technical scale. And that's completely okay. That's actually fine because, you know, I think it doesn't matter how big or how many gigabytes your game is, or how big your map is, or how big your car list is. As long as you have the fundamentals down and you make a solid fucking game first, I don't think any of that really matters. Sure, you may have people chirping on, like, Reddit and, like, Twitter, like, oh, this game doesn't have this specific car or this specific type of road. Like, that doesn't matter at the end of the day. What matters is if you make an enjoyable, solid game first. Doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be, like, expansive. It doesn't have to be on the same levels as Forza or the Crew or Gran Turismo. It just has to be a solid, fun racing game. And I think that's a lesson that I hope that the next Need for Speed game kind of, like, focuses on. The next Need for Speed game does not need to be a huge game. Just take what the Kaizen team did stellar with Unbound, what they did right, what they did wrong, you know, trim out the fat, build a nice map that is unique in all aspects. It doesn't have to be huge. And build a solid racing game first, using everything the Kaizen team learned with Unbound, and just build a solid racing game. It doesn't need to be a huge game. It doesn't have to be a huge project. You don't need to be spending money on ASAP Rocky. You know, you don't have to be doing any of that. You can sit down and just make a solid, good foundation for a game like Tokyo Xtreme Racer and go from there. You don't need, like, a battle pass. You don't need, like, and Tokyo Xtreme Racer is doing extremely well without, like, the Shitoku pass or, like, the Wangan pass. It doesn't have any of that. There's no microtransactions in the game, you know? And also, this is a good thing. It's a single player only game. And I know some people are upset that you can't play multiplayer with the game, but it is a nice, refreshing take that you don't need a game that you don't need. There's a racing game where you don't need the EA, like, launcher. You don't need the Ubisoft launcher. You don't need any of that bullshit. You click play on Steam and it launches. That's all you need. And I think and you can play the game offline. You can play it on your Steam Deck. That's really refreshing when it comes to, like, racing games nowadays, where you need an always online connection. You need to connect to the Ubisoft launcher, the EA launcher, or, like, you can't play games in, like, certain regions with other people. It's a nice, refreshing, I guess you could say, reboot, because that's something we haven't gotten in a while, it seems. And I think that really kind of shows the racing game community, or just the racing game scene at large. And I hope it proves to other developers that, like, if you make a simple, fun game, you can expand upon that later down the road. And that's, like, I think what really is, like, the most important thing here. Because a lot of these games, especially, like, Test Drive is, like, the perfect foil for Tokyo Xtreme Racer. It's like yin and yang, like, two completely separate, like entities. Because on one hand, you have Tokyo Xtreme Racer, which launched as a complete package, a small, refined game that just absolutely bangs. They focus on just making a fun, solid racing game that works first. Just sticking to the basics, walking before you're running. And then on the other hand, you have TDU, which tried to go to the moon, tried to run a 5K before they learned to walk. And built a very lackluster, boring, buggy MMO game where you can't play with someone in a different country or on a different platform in an MMO. So at the same time, I feel like you have these two completely separate games. One saying right to the racing game scene how to make a good game, a good base for a game, and another saying what not to do, how not to make a game. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that's really what it comes down to. It's just building a good base, a nice, simple base for a game. And I think, and Need for Speed's done this in the past too. I think really Hot Pursuit 2010 is a good example of this, you know. Obviously, as the black box was building Need for Speed after Need for Speed, they were on a death march, basically, from Most Wanted to Carbon to Pro Street to Undercover. The game started lacking in quality, started getting a little too big for yearly releases. So Criterion came in and they just took what fans loved about older Need for Speed games and just built a solid racing game, a simple racing game at its core. And the game sold like 10 million copies, I think. It's one of the best selling Need for Speed games, the best received racing games, Need for Speed games in the series. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2010. It's a very simple game at its core. It's literally just cops and robbers. They added some weapons. They built a really solid map, and they added like a fun multiplayer. They added like fun races, fun Hot Pursuit challenges, and they made a very simple game. But like it's sold gangbusters, and it was received extremely well because they sat down and they just took what people loved about Need for Speed and just refined it and just made a simple racing game out of it. And I feel like they can do that again with Need for Speed. Even if they were to make another Hot Pursuit game, or if they were to make like a street racing game, like a legal street racing game, like an Underground style game again, or like a 2015 style game. I feel like if they make like a simple, smaller, but fun and refined experience with the next Need for Speed, using what they learned from the Kaizen team and like the updates from Unbound, I feel like the next Need for Speed can absolutely bang and come kicking out of retirement or the hiatus that it's in. Because who knows, the next Need for Speed game might not come out till like 2028. We don't know that. It's definitely not coming out the year GTA 6 or the year Battlefield comes out. But whenever the next Need for Speed comes out, if they focus on the fundamentals first and sitting down, just making a solid racing game, a simple, solid racing game, instead of trying to go out and do all this crazy shit, I think they'll be off to a winner. And I think Tokyo Xtreme Racer really proves that. You don't need to be big. You don't need to be the biggest guy on the block. You don't have to have the biggest balls to be the best on the block. And I think Tokyo Xtreme Racer really shows that, because it definitely does not have the budget behind it. It definitely doesn't have the size or the scope behind it that Forza or Need for Speed or the Crew do, but it's punching well above its weight, and it's definitely picking a fight with the big boys, and it's winning a lot of those battles. At the end of the day, that's what I think about Tokyo Xtreme Racer and about just like racing games just as a whole as of recently. I hope this game really kind of resets the mindset of a lot of racing game developers, and we can go back to getting some simpler games, hopefully a little more often than we are, because we're waiting like 4 or 5 years for like these gigantic games that are coming out, and they're ending up like dog shit because they're not focusing on the fundamentals, and they're focusing on just adding as much shit into the game as possible. And I think we need a reset. And I think that extends to the racing game, not just the racing game, the gaming community as a whole, because games nowadays, every Tom, Dick, and Harry is trying to be GTA in terms of like scope with their games. GTA is special. That game has been in development for God knows how long, GTA 6. And that will be a revolutionary game. That will be a game to define the entire generation of gaming for years to come. Right? But I also think with GTA 6, Rockstar's building a platform to build upon. I don't think Rockstar is going to go back to just making one game every decade. You know, that's unsustainable, even for Rockstar. I feel like GTA 6 is going to be a platform for which they can expand upon and provide more experiences down the road. I think a lot of games are going that direction. I know Fortnite is really kind of revolutionarized that. I'm not saying the word properly. Revolutionized, you know, because it started out as like a PvE survival, then it ended up as a battle royale. Now you can play Lego games on there. You can play other people's games on there. You can play Guitar Hero on there. Now there's like a 6v6 shooter coming to Fortnite. I feel like a lot of these big games are going to go the way of Fortnite and become platforms to which other people can really kind of build, or the community can build upon them. And then that game studios can also build upon as well. That's my 2 cents. I think that's what GTA is going to end up being. But not every game needs to be like that. You know, not every game needs to be a fucking like huge masterpiece that takes years to develop. I would much rather see a Need for Speed game come out every couple years than just have one Need for Speed game that just gets added and added and added and added like upon like for years. You know, personally, that's personally how I feel it is. I feel like Need for Speed is a good series that you can just make like a good couple games every couple of years. It doesn't have to be 2 years. It could be like every 3 years, you know, but at the end of the day, it doesn't need to be a Forza. It doesn't need to be a great GTA. I feel like a lot of games are trying to be live services that shouldn't be live services. And TDU especially. And I feel like at the end of the day, I feel like the more games like Tokyo Xtreme Racer come out, and I know there's more indie games like racing games and just games in general. I know single player games have been an absolute boon recently in the gaming community. So I'm hoping that the gaming community is seeing this, and with all of like these companies having to lay off people and all of these companies like Ubisoft potentially getting shut down, I think the gaming community, like the suits, are starting to realize this is not sustainable, because where we currently are in the gaming community, it's not sustainable. Building games that take forever to come out and then if they sell or perform, everyone loses their jobs. That's not sustainable. We need more smaller games. We need the type of gaming market where EA can go off, have a criterion, spend a year or two making a solid Burnout game and releasing that, or like a solid Need for Speed game and releasing that. They don't need to be huge games. And I hope I hope we get more games like Tokyo Xtreme Racer in the future, because I hope Tokyo Xtreme Racer is able to kind of reset the gaming landscape, especially the racing game landscape. But what do you think about that? What do you think about this like format of like talking and like podcasting, all that? Because I want to get like my voice out there. I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the community right now, and I absolutely love Tokyo Xtreme Racer. I love talking just about like racing games in general. And with my career and where I am right now in life, I don't have as much time as I wish I did to produce content. But this is also a way to hopefully, you know, get some people on the channel, hanging out with some fun people, talking about like stuff, but then also talking about like current like gaming news and racing game news and all that. I'm probably gonna chop up a lot of these segments into like their own separate videos that you'll find on the channel, because I know for a fact not everybody's gonna click on this like nearly hour-long video to hear me yap about stuff. I mean, I'll have chapters and everything, but at the same time, I feel like if I put them into their own separate videos, I think those could also like help, you know. But what do you think about this? If you have any suggestions for like names of like this podcast, it's currently MotorYap. And if you want to create like a logo as well, like feel free. Anyone who has more creative bones in their body than I do, please do. That would be awesome. What do you guys think about this? Be sure to leave your comments in the comment section down below if you have any suggestions for any future topics, or just like anything that you'd like to see me talk about in the future. But that's it for me tonight. I will catch yous all later. Have a good night, everyone.